Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving into the world of cybercrime in India. You sent us a YouTube video called Inside the Dark Web, How Cybercriminals Operate in India Part 2 Gist. And you wanted to, get to the bottom of it, and, well, that's what we're here for.
Yeah, this video is an interview on the GIST channel with cybercrime investigator Amit Dubey, and he really pulls back the curtain on how these criminals operate, with real-world examples that are pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, it really makes you think twice about online security. One thing that jumped out at me right away was Dubey's point about young cybercriminals. He had a case with a 14-year-old boy who committed electricity bill fraud.
And it wasn't just small potatoes either. This kid managed to steal over 125 million rupees. That's over 1.5 million US dollars.
In just 2 years.
In 2 years.
That's wild. It really challenges those stereotypes of hackers being these shadowy figures in hoodies. It makes you wonder if a 14-year-old can do this, what are more experienced criminals capable of?
Exactly. Dubey's point is that we shouldn't underestimate anyone just because of their age. These young criminals have grown up with technology. They can be incredibly tech-savvy.
It really ties into this bigger issue that Dubey brings up about how vulnerable we are in this always connected world. We've got smart devices, always listening, always collecting data. He even mentioned Alexa and Siri being constantly tuned in.
It's true. Remember those cases in the US where Alexa recordings actually helped solve murders? It makes you wonder, how much of our privacy are we willing to sacrifice for convenience? Is that trade-off worth it?
That's a great question. I mean, I love having Alexa turn on my lights, but it is a little unsettling to think that it's always listening. And it's not just voice assistants either. There was that case in Florida where data from a smartwatch helped solve a murder. It seems like every device we own is becoming a potential source of evidence.
And that brings us to another point Dubey made about CCTV cameras. He actually said they're the easiest devices to hack.
Really? Why is that?
He pointed to weak default passwords and the lack of security updates as the main culprits. And here's the kicker. There are tools like Shodan, which is kind of like a search engine for the Internet of Things.
So you can basically search for unsecured cameras online.
Exactly. And that means anyone with a little bit of tech knowledge could potentially be spying on us through these unsecured cameras. Kind of makes you want to go put some tape over your webcam right now, doesn't it?
Definitely. It's unsettling to think that something meant to increase our security could be turned against us so easily. And then there's the whole issue of deepfakes, which Dubey says are becoming a growing threat, especially for university students, young women in particular.
He shared a story about an accountant who got tricked by a deepfake video call. The scammers created fake videos of the company's CFO and CEO to convince him to make several large payments. By the time he realized it was a scam, the money was long gone.
So these deepfakes aren't just some futuristic technology, they're being used to steal money right now.
Absolutely. And they're getting increasingly sophisticated. It can be almost impossible to tell the difference between a real video and a deepfake. This particular scam was even more convincing because they used another technique. They exploited email servers to send spoofed emails.
So the emails look like they were coming from the real CFO.
Exactly. Combine that with a believable deepfake video call, and it's no wonder the accountant fell for it. It really highlights how important it is to double-check and verify identities, especially when it comes to financial transactions.
It sounds like these cybercriminals are using a whole arsenal of tools and techniques. Dubey mentioned something called hacking kits.
He said there are readily available software and hardware kits out there. One that he highlighted is called Flipper.
What's so special about Flipper?
It's this little device that looks almost like a toy, but it's capable of cloning cards, unlocking cars, and even pushing those malicious pop-ups to nearby phones through Bluetooth.
Wow, that's pretty scary. How easy is it to get a hold of something like that?
That's what's so concerning. Dubey says these tools are becoming increasingly accessible, which means even someone with limited technical skills could potentially use them for criminal activity.
So it's not just the super sophisticated hackers we need to be worried about anymore. And on that note, he had some specific warnings about places like petrol pumps, restaurants, and ATMs where card cloning is still prevalent.
He specifically mentioned a technique called cardjacking, where criminals attach a device to the card reader to steal your information.
So covering your hand when you enter your PIN is actually important advice.
Absolutely. You never know what kind of hidden cameras or skimming devices might be lurking around. Dubey even talked about something called phantom hacking, where criminals create the illusion of a hacked device just to scare people into installing malware.
It's like they're playing mind games with us now.
They prey on our fear and lack of technical knowledge. He actually shared an anecdote about a government minister who received a fake virus alert on his phone and almost fell victim to the scam.
It's a good reminder that anyone can be target. It's not just about being tech savvy, it's about being aware of the tactics these criminals use.
And it seems like they're always one step ahead, finding new ways to exploit our vulnerabilities. Dubé also talked about rental scams on platforms like NoBroker and even on social media.
Yeah, I've heard about those where people advertise fake listings and then disappear with the deposit money.
Exactly. He highlighted the lack of entity verification on many of these portals, which makes it easy for scammers to create fake profiles and listings. And here's the thing, Dubé almost fell victim to a rental scam himself.
Wow, even a cybercrime investigator isn't immune to these scams. It just goes to show how sophisticated and widespread they've become. But what happens if you do fall victim to one of these scams? Is there any way to recover your money?
Dubé outlined a step-by-step guide for recovering funds, and he stressed the importance of acting quickly. The first step is to immediately call the helpline number 1930.
That's a dedicated helpline for cybercrime in India, right?
Yes, it's important to report the crime as soon as possible. Then file an online complaint at www.cybercrime.gov.in. This initiates an official investigation and you'll be assigned an investigating officer.
Okay, but what about the money?
Dubé says the next crucial step is to contact your bank and push for them to freeze the fraudulent account.
Do you think that actually works?
Well, he claims to have helped people recover significant sums of money using this process, so it's definitely worth a try.
It's good to know there are steps you can take to try to get your money back. So far, we've covered a lot of different types of cybercrime, from those electricity bill scams to deepfakes and card cloning. But what about the dark web? I know it's often associated with all sorts of illegal activities.
That's right. Dubé actually drew a connection between the rise of Bitcoin, the dark web, and the increased focus on security and privacy in technology marketing around 2008-2009.
It's like those concepts, which are supposed to be about protecting people, got twisted and used to create a haven for criminal activity.
Exactly. And the dark web provides a platform for these criminals to operate with a level of anonymity that makes them incredibly difficult to track down. He talked about Ross Ulbricht and Silk Road, which was a dark web marketplace for drugs.
I remember hearing about that. It was huge. It operated for years before they finally caught him.
Right. And what's interesting is that Dubé highlighted some of the specific mistakes Ulbricht made that ultimately led to his downfall. He posted on forums using his real name and even revealed his location through a Bitcoin transaction.
So even the most tech-savvy criminals can slip up.
Absolutely. And Dubé's point is that while these cyber criminals are constantly innovating to stay ahead of law enforcement, they're not invincible. They eventually leave a trail, make a mistake, and get caught.
That's somewhat reassuring, I guess. The whole conversation has definitely been eye-opening. It feels like cybercrime is everywhere, and it's evolving so quickly, it's hard to know how to keep up. What are your thoughts so far? Anything in particular that surprised you or that you're still trying to wrap your head around?
It's a lot to take in, for sure. But don't worry, we're going to unpack all of this.
We'll be back in a flash to dive deeper into the dark web and explore the evolving tactics of these cybercriminals. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Before the break, we were talking about the dark web and how it's become a breeding ground for all sorts of illegal activity.
Yeah, like a digital Wild West out there. Dubé mentioned everything from stolen passports and counterfeit currency to like illegal firearms and even assassination services.
It's hard to believe that kind of stuff is really happening online.
Yeah, and what's even more unsettling is the level of organization. Dubé described these criminal networks as offering like packages to ruin someone's life.
Like they're providing a service.
Yeah, with a guaranteed outcome.
It's chilling to think that someone could just hire a group of cybercriminals to destroy someone else's life. With all this happening, are Indian law enforcement agencies actively investigating the dark web?
He said it's not really routine practice. They typically only dive into the dark web when there's a clear connection to a specific case, like drug trafficking or illegal arms dealing.
So it's almost like a blind spot for traditional law enforcement.
In a way, yeah. The dark web presents a unique set of challenges for investigators. The anonymity makes it difficult to track down criminals, and the sheer volume of activity makes it hard to know where to even begin.
Dubé also talked about these cross-border social media influence groups, specifically those focused on manipulating WhatsApp.
Right, he said these groups use mass messaging campaigns and coordinated attacks to spread misinformation and propaganda.
Yeah, I've seen those messages circulating. It can be hard to tell what's real and what's fake.
Exactly, and it highlights another type of security vulnerability. It's not just about technical exploits, it's also about how people can be manipulated and tricked into giving up information or taking actions that compromise their security. So aside from being extra cautious about the links and messages, we click on what practical steps can we take to protect ourselves on WhatsApp specifically.
That's a good question.
Dubé offered a few simple but effective tips. First and foremost, enable two-factor authentication.
That's good advice for any online account, really.
Absolutely. He also suggested adjusting your privacy settings to prevent anyone from adding you to groups without your permission.
Oh, that's a good one. I get added to so many random groups without even knowing how I got there.
It can be overwhelming. And speaking of settings, Dubé also emphasized the importance of disabling auto-download for media files.
Why is that important?
Because you never know what might be lurking in those files. You could unknowingly download malware or even illegal content.
That makes sense. Better to be safe than sorry. What about profile pictures? Are those a security risk too?
Dubé believes they can be. He suggests limiting the visibility of your profile picture, especially if you're not comfortable with strangers having access to it.
With all this talk about deep fakes and scams, it seems like protecting our online identity is more important than ever.
Absolutely. It all comes back to being mindful of our digital footprint and taking control of what information we share online.
Throughout this conversation, I keep coming back to the fact that all these cybercrime innovations don't just appear out of thin air. There are real people, often with technical expertise, driving these schemes.
Dubé made an interesting point about that. He doesn't just call them cyber criminals, he calls them criminals who innovate.
Because at their core, they're criminals, right? They're just exploiting technology for their own gain.
Exactly, and he stressed that their constant innovation is driven by the need to survive to avoid getting caught.
But, as he pointed out, no matter how clever they are, they eventually leave a trail, make a mistake, and get caught.
It's a constant cat-and-mouse game between criminals and law enforcement.
Speaking of getting caught, Dubé shared a story about an arrest at the Odisha airport that really highlights how blurry the lines can be in this digital world.
Yeah, he mentioned an individual who was apprehended based on a tip from a UK influencer, but it turned out the accused was just someone caught up in a complicated situation, possibly even a victim themselves.
Wow, that's crazy. It's a good reminder that not everything is black and white in the world of cybercrime.
Now, sometimes those who appear to be perpetrators might actually be victims of a larger, more complex scheme. It underscores the importance of due diligence when investigating these cases, especially those involving financial scams.
What did Dubé say about investigating financial scams?
He admitted that he often has to filter through numerous reports and prioritize those with the highest potential for recovery. He mentioned that there are even cases where victims were implicated in shady dealings themselves, which can make their claims less credible.
It sounds like it can be really challenging to sort out the truth in these situations. It's a lot to process, but this whole deep dive has been so insightful. We've covered the rise of young cybercriminals, the vulnerability of our devices, the dark web, and even the ethics of investigating these crimes. What stood out to you the most in all of this?
It's definitely been a whirlwind of information, but one thing that keeps coming back to me is the human cost of cybercrime.
That's a great point. We've focused a lot on the technical details and the criminals, but we can't forget about the victims.
Exactly. The psychological and emotional impacts of these crimes can be just as devastating as the financial losses. We'll dig into that more after the break.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Before the break, we were talking about the human cost of cybercrime. You know, it's easy to get caught up in all the technical stuff, but it's important to remember that real people are impacted by these crimes.
Absolutely. And we're not just talking about financial losses. There are psychological and emotional scars that can be incredibly damaging.
Yeah, it's like a violation of your privacy, a sense of betrayal. It can really shake your trust in technology and even in people.
And for some victims, the shame and guilt could be overwhelming. They blame themselves for falling for a scam, and that can be really difficult to deal with.
It makes you realize that cybercrime isn't just about stealing data or money. It's about exploiting human vulnerabilities. Dubé actually made a point about how our education system isn't doing enough to prepare people for the digital world.
Yeah, he said that cybersecurity hygiene should be taught from a young age, just like we teach kids about road safety. It's about giving people the tools and knowledge to protect themselves online.
Makes sense. I mean, we wouldn't send kids out into the world without teaching them how to cross the street safely. So why aren't we doing the same for the online world?
And it's not just about technical know-how, it's also about fostering critical thinking skills, teaching people to be skeptical, to question what they see online, and to verify information before they act on it.
So it's not just about installing antivirus software or creating strong passwords. It's about changing our mindset and becoming more aware of the risks.
Exactly. Dubé also talked about the role of law enforcement in all of this. It's not just about catching criminals, it's about supporting victims and building trust in the system.
What did he say about that?
He emphasized the importance of empathy when dealing with victims, recognizing that they're often traumatized and need support beyond just recovering their stolen funds.
It's about treating them with respect and understanding that this experience can have a long-lasting impact.
He also believes that law enforcement needs to do a better job of communicating with victims, keeping them informed about the progress of their case, and providing resources for emotional and psychological support.
So it's not just about catching the bad guys, it's about helping victims heal and rebuild their lives.
Right, and that's where organizations and initiatives that provide victim support and advocacy can play a crucial role. They can bridge the gap between victims and law enforcement, offer a safe space for sharing experiences, and help people navigate the legal system.
It sounds like addressing cybercrime in India requires a multifaceted approach. It's not just about technical solutions or law enforcement, it's about a societal shift in mindset.
I agree. It requires a collective effort to prioritize cybersecurity education, raise awareness, and foster a culture of empathy and support for victims.
Well, this deep dive has been truly eye-opening. It's clear that the fight against cybercrime isn't just about technology, it's about people. It's about building a more secure, resilient, and compassionate digital world.
And as we conclude our exploration, I want to leave you with a few questions to consider. What can you do as an individual to protect yourself and those around you? How can you contribute to building a more secure and ethical digital landscape?
We've given you a lot to think about today, but knowledge is power. Use this information to stay safe, stay informed, and stay engaged in the conversation. That's all the time we have for today. Until next time, happy and safe surfing.